Investors are running into Argentina as the country makes its long-awaited return to the international bond market. Buenos Aires province is selling bonds today. Diego, you've been invested in Argentina as a distressed investor. Is it still distressed, or I guess another way to put it is it too late to buy into Argentina?
Are you running out?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say we're running out, but we're slowly walking out from a pure distress standpoint. Argentina was a change in regime type story. The regime change, I think investors' hopes in terms of a friendlier government have materialized, and spreads are reacting accordingly. So Argentina is going back to the capital markets, and I think that other places are looking more interesting.
Just to be clear, when we say investors are looking at Argentina, we're not talking typically about distressed investors, right? I mean, you're a different kind of investor than, say, a lot of institutions or retail investors that may be watching right now, because you want to find a place that's in deep distress, not one that's recovering. So if someone's bullish Argentina, you might not want to be there.
Well, the thing is that there is always a transition time between things get fixed and the retail and real money comes in, and usually when those things happen, the second one, people come in, a lot of distressed investors are coming out. But we're not the only ones who have been betting on Argentina when Argentina was much more of a distress. A lot of U.S. distressed firms also participated on that, and they're seeing this as a potential opportunity to exit.
So as you say, there's a new regime.
Yes.
Including not just at the top, but a lot of former Wall Street bankers are right near the top. It looks like they brought them all in. So what's your outlook on Argentina going forward? I mean, what do they need to do to move forward, and will they do it?
That's an interesting question. I think in terms of what they want to do is pretty much whatever any investors would like to, because a lot of these people were educated in the U.S., a lot of these people work in the U.S. The challenges that they're facing are large. The economy is in relatively weak shape in terms of high inflation and serious fiscal deficit. And there's still the whole issue of the holdout resolution that, even though it looks promising, is not a fixed problem yet.
And what about the currency?
Have
they freed it up?
The currency is free, and that obviously has made a bunch of recent deals that had not closed on the M&A deal to have closed. The only issue is that when you compare the Argentine peso to other currencies in emerging markets, it's not cheap. You know, when you see the adjustment that other countries, including Brazil, has experienced in terms of devaluation, Argentina, I think that the peso should be even weaker.
So let's turn to something that is distressed, at least appears to be Brazil. Are you more interested in Brazil at this point as a distressed property?
The only currency, by the way, I'm looking at WCRS on the Bloomberg, right? And I put in the Argentine peso as a baseline. It's stronger than everything except for the Brazilian real.
Well, the thing that when you look at Argentina, I think it's a bit misleading, because the base that you were using for the devaluation is a currency that was obscenely overpriced when the currency was liberalized from 9 to 15. But, you know, so in absolute terms, when you see from a longer historic standpoint, the Argentine peso, it's more expensive than the Colombian peso or the Chilean peso. But going back to Brazil, I think that the interesting thing on Brazil is not necessarily as it was Argentina, that is sort of a macro country story, is the distress that you're seeing in corporations in Brazil that makes it interesting.
So you invest globally?
Yeah.
Are you in Latin America? Are you interested?
We are in Latin America. We're Mexico, though, is the biggest overweight. Brazil, we're underweight, though watching very carefully for what happens with the presidential scandal there. But, you know, he said something very important. I think, you know, good investors have recognized that change, perception of change and then reality of change are both important triggers for returns, but also can be mismatched. In other words, you know, the perception of how quickly Argentina will improve the situation versus how quickly they actually will, you know, can create opportunities. And I think, you know, Argentina has been one of the most interesting places, I think, to invest in the last 2 years.
In the last 2 weeks, Brazil maybe has been one of the most interesting places to invest, though. After the news on the intensified car wash investigation started to come out, you see the Ibovespa take off. I've got a chart of it here. I mean, from February 28th, it's just off the charts. We saw Petrobras
Jumps 15%. Yeah.
Percent. Why are investors piling in when you see Lula under investigation? It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, the thing is that Brazil has economic problems, but the main problem that Brazil has is a political one. And people are starting to look at Brazil as a regime change type situation, and a lot of people hope that the current PT administration would leave. I do not think that that is as likely as a lot of people think, but that doesn't mean that the Brazil economy is not doing reasonable enough to be able to muddle through until the elections. And that goes back to the previous point about expectations versus reality. I think that the situation in Brazil is better than what people now think, and that's why it's a good place to invest.
So the question is, will Brazil become Argentina in terms of regime change? It's less likely.
Well, the thing is that the political situation is relatively stable, and I think that as long as it doesn't get out of context, it's a good place to put your money.
Okay, Diego Ferro of Greylight Capital and Alger's Dan Chung, thank you both very much for being with us today.